We are winding down our program year. We have 2 more sessions in this series of how to talk constructively with people with different views on climate change. I invite you to have a very brief meditation with me on that scripture. Be still and know that I am God. So just relax and say to yourself, be still and know that I am God. Welcome, Reverend Catherine Watkins. So glad that you're with us again today. I hope folks have had a chance to look at Catherine's presentation. If not, that's okay.
Yes.
I'd just like to open it up for your responses and questions to Catherine. Catherine, do you have any lead in before we do that?
Just that I'm interested in hearing feedback and further questions. I do have some examples, but really I'm just interested in going any direction that you guys are interested.
Okay.
Well, first of all, I did think that your comments on anger management and the iceberg were very appropriate for this time in our history with the corona pandemic, because I'm living in a two-level household. You know, my son is much younger than me, 2-generation household. And, you know, a lot of this cropped up not only in our household, but I'm sure in tens of thousands of households, that there are anger problems. And I thought it was very appropriate for today and for now and in an immediate situation.
Thank you. Something I will say, and I'm going to look at my watch on this because literally this is what I do for a living, but I'm going to jump in and just this pandemic and crisis is trauma for all of us. Trauma, I like the definition of it's too much input and stimulation without enough resources to manage. And that's sort of where we are right now, which means that every single one of us is having our own type of trauma response. They vary, and a lot of people won't admit that that's what's happening, but it is. So everything is very, very amplified right now because our bodies are stuck in cycling through those defense mechanism modes because we don't know how to react to it. You know, when the fire alarm goes on, or, okay, let's say you're driving on an icy road, and most of us here in Chicago have that experience. You put on the brakes and that anti-lock brake starts. It's instinct to turn into it and hold the brakes a little bit. We know that. But because our brain goes to what worked last time. And so we go into like stay at home, shelter in place, there's a global pandemic, and our brain goes, what worked last time? So we're cycling through states of very high agitation because our brain wants to figure out what would be the most productive to help. So we're cycling between fight, flight, and freeze, play dead. And none of it's working, so we keep cycling through it. So we're going through these periods of really high adrenaline rushes and crashes. And because we can't be productive with the adrenaline, we can't fight off a bear, we can't run away from the whatever our brain thinks. We're in these high states of agitation, and then we're going, Mom, I don't like peanut butter, because it's coming out. We don't know what to do with it. And so, yes, it is. You are absolutely correct where there's extra headbutting, not because we hate each other, but because we are programmed to be uber defensive right now. Because every day we're being told there's this big, scary, life-threatening thing out there. And what do we get to do about it? Nothing. We have to play dead. And that's not what our bodies are programmed to do. So, you know, I can go into that a lot more. I'd like to save that for later because I want to kind of address as much as possible about some of the stuff we've been talking about. But it's actually really, really interesting to be a trauma clinician during this time for a lot of what you have said, where all of our states are so heightened and what that means for our innate trauma responses. So best of luck in the multi-generation household there, and just be kind to yourself and invite your younger generation, your son, you had mentioned to try to be kind to himself as well, because this is so unprecedented. There is no script. So anyway, back to this stuff, because I literally could do that for hours. So anything about the program?
I wonder if you could go over the PACE, P-A-C-E, one more time.
Yes.
That was very helpful.
PACE, playfulness. I had a slide for you guys, but then I couldn't figure out how to share my screen. That was that break in there. We sort of, that was a total technological fail there. So I get to say it. Playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, empathy. Okay. The playfulness is geared a little bit more towards kids. The guy who created this works primarily with children, not super young, but he works with kids within the foster system and helping them bond with adoptive or foster families. And this is what he uses with his adoptive or foster parents to try to create bonds with these kids. And some of the playfulness is to invite that non-aggressive, non-intimidating presence, because we can't be playful when we're fearful, and we can't be fearful when we're playful. So it's not that I recommend you going up to adults and saying, "I like your shoes," but if you think about it, that's not aggressive. And so there is, I mean, don't be patronizing about it, but it's actually not ineffective. It's a little strange for adults, but the playfulness is there to emphasize the non-aggression. Acceptance, whatever. Yes.
Catherine, excuse me. May I ask you to put it in a context? What is PACE for? What's the purpose of PACE? I'm thinking that some people may not have actually watched your presentation yet.
I'm going to go through the acronym and then give an example.
Okay, good.
Cool. Acceptance, whatever that person has said. This is for engaging another person, by the way. Just take whatever that other person has said as true for them. In the context of these kids, a lot of times with reactive attachment, they'll say, "Nobody loves me." And it's instinct to want to say, "It's not true." The acceptance says, "Oh man, that must feel lonely." Or, accepting that they've said it because it feels true, at least. Curiosity, tell me more. Curiosity, as opposed to you have to justify yourself. Curiosity says, "I'd love to know more about that. I am interested." And empathy, I started to say that with acceptance, that must feel tough. Believing that the feelings that come along with that statement also exist. So PACE with someone who, let's say we're Jeffrey. And I've said, "Man, I hate your red shirt." And Jeffrey, okay, PACE would be, minus the little bit of playfulness, the acceptance he would assume that that's true for me, that I am just not liking this red shirt. Curiosity, tell me more about that. And empathy, just, "Oh, wow. Yeah, I am wearing a red shirt. Sounds like, if I'm like agitated about it, sounds like that's important to you. Tell me more about that. What is it? Is it my red shirt? Is it all red shirts? Tell me more about that." So it's a way of engaging that is productive.
Could you put that in the context of talking with someone who denies climate change?
That is a huge, vague question.
Mm-hmm.
Because, so this is one of the ways that it gets difficult, because what are we walking up to a protester on the street? Are we having a conversation with someone at a dinner table? Are we into that conversation, or is it the first question? If someone says, let's give it like an actual conversational example. Well, that's just crazy. The science supports that fossil fuels are not bad. Okay, let's say someone says that. The ACE part, so acceptance, curiosity, and empathy, would say, okay, this is true for them. They believe it. Okay, whether or not we think it's ridiculous, we are accepting The point of the acceptance part is not to argue its validity. It's not to say, well, you're full of crap, and here are the 12 articles that deny that. The acceptance part is like, don't argue it. Curiosity is about asking more, and empathy is about trying to understand where they come from. So it might be something like, what did I just say? Fossil fuels aren't bad. Okay. If they've said it with a lot of chutzpah, you could say, wow, it sounds like that's really important to you. Tell me more. Some of the something I kept saying in the presentation is, how do you know that? What is it about these articles or whatever it is that you've chosen to believe, without saying it that way, that have caught your attention? Do you tell me more? That's the curiosity of tell me more, as opposed to how can you believe that? That has a condescending tone to it. So it might say, this sounds important to you. Tell me more. Tell me more. And I'd love to know, oh, I'm not familiar with those articles. Can you tell me where you found them? What about them captivated your attention? One of the things that, again, in the presentation, alluded to Michael. Yes, I got it right. Michael had said something about talking about how science is so good at contradicting itself, and how one day you have the article that says coffee is so good for you, and the next day there's an article about how coffee is so bad for you. So really, science is something that I don't want to say we have to believe in, but we are able, no matter what we're doing, we can find articles, statistics that support what we want. I think we've figured that out, particularly with this administration, that we can find scientific evidence to support just about anything. So I would be curious about, what is it about those statistics that captured your attention? Because whether it's someone who rationally and logically selected the articles that have the most peer-reviewed, whatever, all of this stuff, or it's someone who's literally cherry picking the ones that just happen to support their views, we are choosing, right? We are choosing to believe in X, Y, or Z, or, take this supporting evidence. So I would want to say, why these articles? How come those captured your attention? And they might say, well, they were written by my grandfather, something. Oh, well, that makes more sense in terms of why that might be important to them. The pace is getting them to explain more, so that you might start to find out the why behind some of it, especially the seemingly, I don't want to say ridiculous, but those just statements that are kind of like the kids saying, well, nobody loves me, where you just want to say, well, that's ridiculous, let's move on. Finding out more information as to why they're even saying that tells you why this is so charged, why it's so important. And at the very least, you might find some new statistics or something that are interesting.
And what about the E part, the empathy part, or climate change?
It's about meeting them as human beings. I don't know if any of you guys saw Finding My Brain. So Earth Day was Wednesday. National Geographic did a special on Jane Goodall, and it was amazing. I don't know. I mean, it's been replaying a whole bunch. I recorded it and thought, but I watched it yesterday, and it is great because it talks about not just her work, but it's called The Hope. And for a scientist to talk about hope is just not something you normally see. And one of there's actually a large section in there where it talks about how she tried to bridge some gaps and actually work with some of the oil companies and the large companies in Africa that are responsible for a lot of deforestation. And she talked about how a lot of other climate activists refused to work with her because they thought she was, sort of talking to the bad guys. And she talked a lot about how you have to understand them as human beings to be able to work with them and to be able to make change. And so that was huge. But yes, empathy part. We're all humans. I think we can, Michael talks a lot about not viewing them as other people, right? It's not strange and different. The empathy part is humanizing it. Okay, figuring out, and I think that's one way that we can create more conversations, because I'm not interested in talking with some robot who's going to throw rotten tomatoes at me. I'm interested in talking to another human being who is interested in having a productive conversation. And the empathy keeps them human. Sounds like that's important. Oh man, that is a very moving statistic. You may not believe in it, but to say, wow, if I saw that, that's really interesting. Keeping it human. There's emotion in it, and recognizing what their emotions might be.
So Catherine, if I can follow up on that, in a therapy session, how would you move from the empathy stage to helping them, a client, start to recognize that the way they were thinking, that you now listened to, understood, and been empathetic about, is in fact unhealthy or inaccurate?
That's a really loaded question.
Well, it's our climate conversation dilemma.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
I have that brother that sits at the table that I love deeply, but I think is absolutely off the rails in terms of what sources of information he's decided to latch onto, and how I view that relative to the set of facts that I've decided to embrace.
So I'm actually going to remove that from the therapy room, and because that's a whole nother, it's not even a can of worms. It's like a bathtub of worms. Because there are definitely clients for whom I'm like, can you hear yourself right now? Those are ones with whom I have a rapport, seriously. I have this one fantastic client. I don't even have to say anything. I'll just do something like hold up Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and she's like, I know, we're in safety right now. I can't be thinking about, and I'm just like, it's just fantastic. Anyway, and there are some other clients for whom, and I'm just sort of giving you context, for whom we do a year of PACE because it takes that long to build rapport. If they're that distrusting. So I want to remove this from the therapy office for a moment. And let's say I'm at a dining room table with, we'll say family, but we could also say just others, or at a, I don't know, dinner party or cocktail party or something. And it is, so family is, I will just add that is extra difficult because we all have these family roles. And I happen to be one of the more disregarded. My brother and sister sort of hold a little bit more clout in my parents' eyes because they have real grown-up jobs. And so there is a part of me that is just continually dismissed. And I mention that because it matters about how I'm able to be heard. So the dynamics between you and your brother, not sure who's older or who was mom or dad's favorite, but that will matter because, and so that's why I almost think like dinner party or table or something that has a little less weight to it, because my sister's really good at being, patronizing, just sort of like, there, little Catherine, you, and I'm older. Anyway. Liz, we can talk later.
Yes, we can.
It is a thing.
I know.
But it's, so yeah, let's say we're at a table and, Steve, give me so you're sitting there and I know, this is something my dad said, a couple years ago, not too long ago. So, for the first time in my life, probably, my parents actually voted for the same person I did. So they were not on that band. I mean, they're very Republican, but not, they didn't necessarily vote for him. They've shared that, that's why. But it was like a year and a half into it. The presidency, my dad said, whether or not I like what he's doing, you gotta admit he's getting stuff done. This was when he was just running around like signing those executive orders, like what? And I sat there first dumbfounded because I can't. But what I should have done, let's use that situation and what I now, with much more wisdom and maturity and about 900 miles between us, could have said. We're even stopping for a second and be like, wait, Dad, did you just say that? Or, you know, are you saying you support him? So I would start with curiosity, especially if I'm stunned a little bit. You know, tell me more about that. I said, okay, are you, or asking more, are you saying that, because we didn't have a conversation about this, mind you, I'm speculating like everything right now. We're just making this up. Are you excited that things are moving forward, or is it the things that he's getting done? You know, what's going on here? The other thing I highly suspect that, again, we didn't talk about or anything like that, is that my dad was probably a fan of some of the, I'm trying to figure out the words I want to use. The ways in which Trump has made life a little bit easier for those with large investments. So I have a feeling that there was some, my dad's retirement came in the form of stock options. So my guess is there was something like that. So I might dig. If it's not my dad and I don't know that, what is it about that you're, you know, and if, let's say he said something like, you know, I don't like the things he's doing, but you know, with when we had a Democratic president and a you know, Republican, just how everything was getting hung up in the Senate and in Congress, and nothing was getting done, and blah blah blah. I could probably have a conversation about that. Not agree, but you know, even saying back to him, okay, so it's just frustrating to see things get stuck and not move and not have a productive government. I could understand that. I want to believe that my government can get things done too. And it not doing things would be the opposite. So that's a way in which you could use that curiosity and the empathy of trying to understand where it comes from. Here's an example I will share with you about someone who told me, without asking, that they voted differently from me. And I was struggling with it. So this is an example of how you might say to your brother or to the other person why this matters to you or why it bothers you. I had a good friend. We were very close. This was one of Obama's terms. I think it might have been the first one. And we had been talking about, she was debating what, anyway. And so after, I think we'd talked about mailing in ballots or whatever. And she said, you know, I got to tell you, I didn't vote for Obama. At first I was like, whatever, it's your business. But she sort of said, I can tell that, you know, you're mad at me or something. I didn't say anything, but I can tell you're mad at me. And it took me a while to sort of break it down. And I tripped over my words a lot, but had said something to the extent of, I said, I'm not mad at you, and I do believe that everyone has the right to vote however they want without any friends or anyone, you know, stepping on that. And I have no problem with your political views. But, you know, let me break this down a bit. I forget even, it was like, I think it was when he was up against McCain. And I said, there are some real ways in which a McCain administration poses a threat and safety to me and my livelihood. As a member of the queer community, this was before DOMA was dead, you know, all this stuff. And I said, I do worry about my safety and many of my close friends' safety under a Republican administration. And knowing that you actively voted against my safety is something that makes me sad. I don't think you need to change your vote because you have one friend who, you know, but that's what I'm struggling with. I'm not struggling with your political affiliations. It makes me sad that my safety could be at risk. And, you know, I'm sure this would be really different if it was a matter of just my investments as opposed to my physical safety. And so I sort of explained that to her. And I said, I know that there are 1,000 reasons to vote for a candidate other than this one friend's safety. And I know she has a lot of friends who are queer, so it's not just one friend, but I am only speaking for me. And we had a much more productive conversation when I was able to say, I'm not mad at you. It saddens me that you voted against my safety. I'm not telling you should have changed your vote, but that's where I am. So, Steve, something along those lines of, yeah, he's getting a lot of things done, but also, I think about the people whose safety is at risk under this administration. And that worries me. And there are a lot of things, of course, we could say about this administration, but, and so a lot of times I will have to remind my family that I said, you do realize I work with people for whom safety is not a guarantee. And, I talk about, I keep it as vague as possible, but even things that are really deeply personal, even to me, about my own life, I think my family is more able to hear it when I keep it other, and I say, I work with people who, or, I'm highly aware of, excuse me, I'm highly aware of the safety issues that can and may exist for fill in the blank, people of color, Indigenous people, all of this. So it doesn't mean you'll change their mind, but the hope is that if you can say something about why it matters to you, as opposed to just saying, well, I want to fight you on this because, a lot of right wingers seem to believe that people who dislike them is just, use the language, but for shits and giggles. And for you to put something behind that, that's sort of like, no, here's why. It's not just because I want to be your bratty little younger brother or whatever it is. It's, anyway. So
is part of that using I language, Catherine?
I language, using empathy, using, because empathy can be from you too. Yes, a lot of I language and a lot of why for you. Why does this matter? Why are you interested? Why?
Catherine, as part of this whole struggle with how to deal with people that have different perspectives from ours, one of just lowering our expectations as to what we might be able to accomplish in terms of talking to them in 5 minutes or an hour or whatever, and just being able to engage would be a victory without having to trying to convince somebody of something else. Just being patient.
So if you're going into a conversation with the goal or expectation of convincing someone else of something, I think you already kind of shot yourself in the foot. I think if you're going in there to try to understand more, because they're also going to be going in with the hope and expectation of convincing you of something. Therefore, neither of you are going to do that. Hope and understanding. Maybe your expectation is to get them to see to see that your perspective exists, and your perspective not just like there are climate deniers and climate not deniers, not just that, but the what's the word I'm looking for? The position or your view of, I'm worried about climate change, whether or not it's real, because I have grandchildren and I want to know that I'm leaving them a world in which they can live. So, whether or not I am interested in finding out more about what is going on and doing everything we can to save this planet because of, and I don't, if you say something like that, I'm sure people would say, someone else would say, I have kids too, and I don't care about what I leave them or whatever. Like that's something really different. I don't know if it's lowering expectations so much as changing dialogue, conversation, having, if we do step back into the therapy room for a hot minute, there are sometimes some of the best movement I can make in a session is just saying to someone, do you see how this might be true? Like, we don't accept it or believe it, and I'm certainly not doing it, but yeah, I could see clients with like really over dramatic personalities. It's like, do you feel like sometimes you lose friends because they think you're so dramatic? She's like, yes. We didn't get to the point where you're calling you dramatic, but do sometimes other people think that you're dramatic? So that kind of, and that was massive, the fact that she could recognize that. So something like that, where something along the lines of wanting to leave a healthy world for future generations, or being worried about what we leave for future generations, is probably a place where you could bond and find some empathy with someone who may not, because the far extreme of climate denying is, that's not who you're trying to engage, because that's not possible, right? The people who are like, I know you are, but what am I? That's just not, my guess is that's not who you even, my guess is it's not who you're trying to engage, because that would not be effective. So people along that more middle road, where let's say you're at a dinner party, or you're at this, I'm at my dining room table right now, which is why I keep saying this. Let's say we're at a dining room table, and okay, I have a great example for you here. My family, they're not necessarily climate change deniers, but minimizers perhaps, and definitely of the view of it's not really my problem, or I don't need to do anything with it. So this isn't, I'm not going to put them in the category of flat earth society. They're not wacko. They are sometimes difficult to deal with, but they're not necessarily full-blown deniers. However, they don't really do anything to help the situation. Here's something. So this past Christmas, I decided to make a statement. Every gift that I got was from either a small business or it was eco-friendly. And I made a stink about each one. When they opened there, I was like, listen, you get a story with that. I used no single-use anything, wrapping paper, tape. So I had, it took a little bit extra energy. I had a friend who sews, make little gift bags, and I made a wee bit of a stink about it. And it breaks my heart that the others definitely, love to shop at places that don't take small businesses into account. But I made a stink. Unfortunately, they all gave the bags back to me. I was like, you can keep them and use them in the future. They gave them back, but I'll use them again. But it's like this small piece of, so at the end of Christmas morning, okay, there's the way we do it, and my sister wasn't even there, so it was even less. There's one of those big 55-gallon black trash bags, and my dad is in charge of the trash bag. You would honestly think I'm 12 when we're at home. And we all have to crumple up our wrapping paper and toss it to my dad, who puts it in the bag. Anyway, this is a lot. But at the end of Christmas morning, or present opening, that bag, it maybe wasn't full, but it was big. And I made a comment that said, can you imagine if just half the households in the US did half of that every Christmas morning? And I think it started to get some wheels turning, or I said, I know, yes, it took me a little extra energy, but I have enough financial stability that I don't have to do all my shopping the day before Christmas and rely on Amazon to overnight ship. So wheels turning a little bit. Now, if I wanted to make more of a stink, I could say, I'm refusing to accept gifts from anyone that are not small business or, whatever. So I'm blanking on your name, Paul. I think some of the, engaging a climate denier is not just about saying, I can't believe you think the earth is flat, but about saying, my sister-in-law in particular was like, I think she was really taken by this, and we're good friends anyway. She texted me a lot after that and just said, that black trash bag, it hit me that it didn't even have any trash from you in it. And so she started thinking, and like, this is how we do this. This is how we have conversations, right? And my family doesn't want to have conversations that are probing. So I do things like use cloth Christmas bags. And, you know, when they opened their gifts, I said, now that is from a small business called blah, 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 blah. It's on Central Street and this is important. And they were, yeah, I think some of them were kind of like, okay, that's nice. But I know I hit home with the sister-in-law. My mom, I got her stuff from the Spice House on Central. She's obsessed with it, with the spices themselves. And so I'm like, oh, let me tell you a little bit about that small business. I'll send you more. And it's getting her thinking. And now she wants to get more spices from a small business. It's the little things. I know that we're not Christmas gift giving to, you know, these people that we're trying to engage sort of on the other, but that's an example of how you can make statements with more than just, you have to see the world the way I'm seeing it.
Mm-hmm.
That was longer winded than I had planned.
It's a great example.
Yes,
Yep.
it is.
It's all
Right.
good.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes
Catherine?
actions speak louder than words.
Well,
Just
my
a couple-
sister had some snarky remarks for me because I shipped hers and I said, don't open it until Christmas because it's not wrapped. I said, I'm not using any single wrap. And she goes, I'm sure that's why it's not wrapped. You just didn't want to wrap it. And I was like, forget it.
Rude.
We got a couple minutes.
Yes. Liz, did you have something?
I did. I have a question. My big question I love the PACE acronym.
Mhm.
My big question is the playfulness. And especially, like you said, the acronym is more focused on kids to begin with. And I liked your example of saying, you know, I like your shoes. It maybe we don't say that to adults, but it's easy to compliment somebody, to open a conversation. But the playfulness is really hard in general, especially for some of us. I mean, just as adults, sort of less playful in general than kids. But obviously, in these issues that we're talking about, they're not funny. They're not playful. And so, especially those of us who have been thinking about them for a while, we don't come at them, right? It's not a joke. And so it's hard. How do you inject that, like, lightheartedness when we're not taking, but how do we figure out I get the A, the C, and the E.
Yeah.
How do we inject that into these harder conversations about anything?
I would say that the topic is never the playful part. You know, particularly when Dan Hughes is doing this is about kids who don't feel loved. Like, there's nothing funny about that. It's about how we go about it, as well as I think it's really helpful for us as well. Speaking of those who are trying to address, because it kind of loosens us up too from that rigidity. One of the things that I really love to say to clients, I said this a lot as a chaplain. I remember the first time I said it. I will back up here. One of the things I say, let's back up to when I started saying it. There we go. So a lot of work in pediatric chaplaincy. And there were a lot of times, particularly when I was still in my 20s, where I'm like, you know, what do I say? Just not the life experience and all that. And I was with I can't remember the exact situation, but I was usually with a family in the middle of the night in some consultation room. And there was this thing, it wasn't something as simple as a kid was sick, but there was some complicated something or other. And I just remember saying it's probably a dad or something, and I said it before I realized what I was saying, but I go, well, this sucks. And he goes, thank you. You are the first person because everyone's like, oh, it's okay, you know, it's this. And I was like, I'm sorry, but this is, and he's like, it sucks. And it was this, there was some, you know, they couldn't find it. It was a kind of, you know, for lack of a better word, a bit of a clusterfuck. And I had this moment of just how real that was. And there were times when I would be with a family and we've, you know, of course, past triaging and we're going through this and they have their water and they have their Kleenex and they have their, and you're just sort of settled in for the next, you know, doctor's not going to update you for an hour. And I'll say something not playful, not funny, but that is real. Then, you know, like, I bet this isn't how you were planning on spending a Friday night. What do you need? Like, I know this is not what you had planned, And there are times when they're like, no. And it becomes a little more real. And so I use that actually a lot in counseling as well, where clients will come in and they'll be like, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then the guy I like is seeing this other girl, and then other this, and I'm like, well, that sucks. I mean, you laugh at it, and that's the part of me that thinks it's kind of playful. It's real.
Right.
So I can just imagine if someone comes to you and you're all like, okay, let's save the planet, and they're like, how am I supposed to save the planet? I barely have enough money to make ends meet. I can't afford to do, I have to do my shopping at, I don't know, some big box store that's destroying the environment and blah, blah, blah. But they don't say it like that. It's usually more aggressively like, well, it is, and I don't know what it is. It's like, yeah, no, that sucks. Wait, let's be real about this. You don't have to use those exact words, but my point is that you can be not playful as in making fun of something, but you can be real about it. You can connect with them on something. The playfulness is about connection. One of the things that there was, I gotten a new client. It was our first session. I don't know why he had called and asked for me, because we were demographically really, really different. And he wasn't sure how to start. He seemed nervous. So I said, hey, I noticed your phone number has an Atlanta area code. You from Atlanta? Dude, that's where I went to seminary. And then he's like, yeah, I went to Columbia. I was like, I went to Emory, I went to Candler. There we go.
Yeah.
It's not playful as in, I think your shoes are cool, but it's a connection. I know, Jeffrey, you're trying to jump in here.
Well, just that the P ends where the P brings us back to the E at the end.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about connection at the beginning, connection at the end. As human,
that was well done.
Wow.
Well done.
Super genius.
I want to thank everybody for being on this call, especially for the Reverend Catherine Watkins from SamaraCare. I forgot to mention your employer, our neighbor, the people that my fellow pastors and I often send church members to when we think that therapy might be worth their consideration. Thank you, Catherine. You're a very warm, engaging, real person. Thank you.
And thank you to Jane. Your wonderful Jane is on our board, and so you can always ask her questions too.
Isn't Jane on every board of every nonprofit in the North Shore?
I just know she's on ours.
I want to conclude with the words of St. Francis, who many hundreds of years ago wrote, "O divine master, grant that I may not so much seek to be understood as to understand." And then Stephen Covey, do you remember him, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People or whatever? The 5th habit is first understand, then be understood. So I thought that was relevant, a modern and an ancient example. See you all soon. This is being recorded so that it'll be available this coming week. Anything else for the good of the community before we sign off?
Remember to be teachable. You're not always right. You don't have to change your beliefs, but you can still expand your education, your understanding. Yeah.
I want to thank Catherine for her wonderful presentations, both of them. And she was very forthcoming and vulnerable enough to communicate extraordinarily well.
Thank you.
Yep.
Very helpful. Bravo.